An 8-foot alien queen refused all males, then a human gave her what no alien could. The sky above the alien world burned bright red as the twin suns rose over the black mountains. The people of Jareen bowed before their queen, their heads low and their voices quiet, for they knew. She did not like noise in the morning. She stood on her balcony, tall and proud, her body covered in golden armor, her eyes cold and sharp, like blades. Her skin shimmered like dark silver, and her crown was made from the horns of the beasts she had killed with her own hands. She was Queen Zalara, ruler of the Jareen, the tallest, the strongest, the most feared female in the galaxy. She was 8 feet tall, and no male had ever dared touch her without her permission, not even once. The council stood behind her with worried faces. They had met with her many times before, but today they were afraid to speak first, until finally one of the elders stepped forward, his voice shaking as he said, "My queen, it is time you choose a mate." The queen turned her head slowly, her eyes glowing, her voice was deep and smooth like thunder rolling through the clouds, and she said, "Why?" The elder bowed again and said, "The people worry without an heir. The bloodline ends, and the throne will fall. The outer tribes grow bold without fear of your child." The queen laughed. Once, just once, but it was enough. The sound echoed through the stone palace like a lion's roar. She said, "I do not need a male to rule, and I will not let one touch me just to make an heir." The council looked at one another, but no one argued, no one dared not, when her eyes burned like that, not when her voice carried the weight of planets. She walked away from them, leaving the hall empty, her long cloak trailing behind her like a shadow. The servants in the lower halls whispered among themselves. They had seen her crush a warrior's skull with one hand when he challenged her. They had seen her cut down kings who thought they were strong enough to take her throne, and now they wondered, would she ever take a mate? Would the throne survive? If she didn't, Noten, the Temple of the Stars, an old priest read from the scrolls, his voice soft and slow. He said, "There will come a time when the queen will feel something she has never known before, a fire, not of war, not of pride, but of something else, something born from outside the stars." No one listened to him, not really. His voice was old and cracked, and his mind was slow with age, but he read the scrolls every night, hoping someone would hear him, hoping someone would understand what the prophecy truly meant. Meanwhile, the queen sat alone in her chambers, staring at the great map of her kingdom. Her mind sharp, her heart closed. She had never felt love and never cared for it. Love was weakness. She had always believed it could be used against her, just like fear. She remembered the suitors who had tried to win her hand. Strong alien males from warrior clans, giant brutes from mountain tribes, cunning nobles who spoke sweet words, but all of them wanted the same thing. Her throne, her power, her body. None of them wanted her for who she truly was, so she refused them all, and the people called her the Untouched Queen. Some admired her, some feared her, all obeyed her, but deep in the stars, far from Jareen, a small ship flew toward her world. It was not a royal ship, not a warship, not even from her galaxy. It was something different, something strange. Inside the ship was a single human pilot. His name was Jace Thorn. He was not a king, not a soldier, not a spy. He was a simple explorer, looking for fuel and a place to rest, but fates had other plans for him. His ship sent a signal to the nearest world, and that world was Geranthe. Queen's guards intercepted the signal and brought the news to her throne room. The queen listened, without much care, until she heard one word that made her raise her head. Hugh meant. The queen narrowed her eyes and asked, "Bring him to me." The council tried to stop her. They said, "It is only a small creature, nothing to waste your time on." But the queen said again, "Bring him to me." And so the wheels of fate began to turn slowly, quietly, without sound, but with great force. The queen, who had refused all males, was about to meet the one being who would change her forever, not with strength, not with riches, but with something no alien male had ever given her before. Something real, something impossible, something that could never be planned. A simple humana, simple choice, and a future no one could see coming. The sky above the palace was heavy with clouds. As the guards led the small figure through the gates, every step he took was watched by soldiers, warriors, nobles, and even servants who peeked from behind stone pillars and high windows, their eyes filled with confusion and curiosity. He did not look strong, he did not wear armor, he did not carry a weapon. His hair was short and dark, his skin pale, his clothes light and simple. He was nothing like the males the queen had destroyed before, and yet he walked with a calm step and a steady gaze. Jace Thorn was not a warrior, not by the standards of the Jareen. He had come from a broken Earth ship, hoping only to find fuel and maybe food. He had landed in the wrong place at the wrong time, but something inside him told him to keep walking forward, no matter how many sharp spears pointed at him. The guards brought him to the throne hall, where Queen Zalara waited, sitting on her golden seat, her tall figure wrapped in a new cloak made from dragonhide. her eyes glowing like twin stars. As she watched the human approach, the hall was silent. Not a breath, not a whisper. The air was thick with tension. No one knew what would happen next. Not even the queen herself. Just stopped a few steps from the throne. The guards moved to force him to bow, but before they could touch him, he raised one hand and said softly in the old universal tongue, "I do not kneel to strangers, but I mean no harm." There was a long pause, then a low sound filled the hall. It was the queen. She was laughing again. But this time it was not cold, not sharp. It was softer, a sound no one had heard in many years. "You are bold for something so small," she said, rising slowly from her throne. She walked down the steps, her eyes never leaving him, her presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Jace looked up at her, his heart pounding but his voice steady. He said, "Size does not decide worth, and respect is earned, not given." The nobles gasped. The guards tightened their grip on their weapons, but the queen raised her hand and all went still. She studied him like a hunter studies prey, but also like a scholar studies a puzzle. She circled him slowly, her voice thoughtful. "You do not tremble, you do not flatter. Are you foolish, or just different?" "I do not know," Jay said. "I only know how to be myself." The queen stopped in front of him, close enough for him to smell the strange sweet scent of her skin. Her voice dropped lower, and she asked, "Why are you really here?" "My ship was damaged. I need fuel and parts," Jace answered, "and maybe a quiet place to rest, if that is allowed." The queen turned her head slowly, then waved a hand. "Let him stay in the guest tower," she said, and walked back to her throne. The council tried to protest, but she silenced them with one look. Later night the queen stood on her high balcony again, the stars above her, and her thoughts spinning like wild birds. She could not stop thinking about the way the human spoke, the way he stood, the way he did not try to impress her or fear her. He was not strong, not fast, not dangerous, and yet he had something the others did. Noth had Python the tower. Jace sat alone, looking out at the strange alien city. Lights danced on the sky bridges. Glowing animals moved in the distance, and tall towers reached for the clouds. He felt far from home, but not lost. He had seen many worlds, but none like this. A knock came at the door, and a small servant entered with food. She stared at him with wide eyes and whispered, "Are you not afraid of her?" He smiled gently and said, "Should I?" Beatty servant shivered and said, "She has killed kings with her bare hands." Jace looked down at his plate and said, "I am not a king, just a guest." The queen watched all this from her viewing crystal. She had ordered her spies to keep eyes on him, but what she saw now was not what she expected. He helped the servant carry the food. He asked her about her life. He even cleaned his own table after eating. No alien male had ever done that. The next morning she called for him again, but this time not in the hall, this time in her private garden, a place no outsider had ever seen. When he arrived, he saw trees with silver leaves, water that floated instead of flowing, and flowers that sang when touched. He stood still in wonder, and she watched him from the shadows, curious and silent. He did not speak first. He waited until she appeared, then bowed his head just a little and said, "This is a beautiful place." And she replied softly, "Not many think so. They see only my throne, my power, my armor, not the world I tried to protect." Jews looked at her and said, "Maybe they do not take the time to look deeper in." For the first time in many years, the queen felt something in her chest. Not fear, not pride, something she could not name. Something small but bright like a star beginning to glow. The wind howled across the black stone cliffs as the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows over the training grounds. The queen stood high above, watching from her balcony. Her arms crossed, her eyes sharp as blades, her heart strangely restless. Below her stood Captain Jace Thorne, dressed in light armor made from local hides given to him by the queen's own servants. It was a test, not just of body, but of spirit, and she wanted to see how much truth lived in this human's words. The arena was wide and filled with old bones, the remains of beasts that once guarded the temple of fire. The trial of flame and bone was meant to break even the strongest of warriors. It was a place of traps, firestorms, and the echoes of those who failed before the council had warned her. This test would kill him, but she only gave them a quiet look and said, "If he dies, then he was never meant to stay. If he lives, then let us see what lives inside this soft creature." Just stood still as the stone gate behind him closed. The crowd above watched in silence, warriors, nobles, servants, and even the young ones who hid behind pillars to see the strange visitor from the stars. Loud horns sounded, and the ground shook. The test had begun. Fire poured from the sides of the arena, hot and fast. Jace ran forward, not blindly, but with care. He watched the ground for traps. He listened for changes in the wind. He moved like someone who had learned to survive without strength, using only his wits and Speed, the first beast, came from the shadows, tall and thin with black skin and burning eyes. It leaped at him with claws sharp enough to tear metal, but Jace rolled under its strike, grabbed a piece of bone from the ground, and jammed it into the beast's chest. The creature screamed and vanished into light. The queen leaned forward, her eyes wide, her breath caught in her throat. She had seen her best warriors fall to that beast, but this human had ended it. With one move, more challenges came. A wall of fire, a puzzle with shifting stones, a bridge that collapsed under weight, but Jace used his mind to pass each one. He used timing, balance, and even humor once he pretended to trip. Just to trick a trap into triggering early. The crowd gasped, then laughed, then cheered. He was not strong, not fast, not brutal, but he was alive and moving forward. At the heart of the trial, he found the flame core. A crystal that burned with ancient power. He was meant to place it on the altar, to end the trial, but something blocked his path. A final beast, massive and covered in armor, with smoke rising from its mouth and fire in its breath, just looked at the crystal, then at the beast, then at the ceiling. High above, the queen watched, closely waiting for the moment he would fail, but instead she saw him smile. A small, clever smile, and run not toward the beast, but toward the walls. He grabbed a spear from the bones, and threw it at a weak stone. High above, it hit hard, and caused part of the ceiling to fall crushing the beast beneath rubble. The crowd exploded with cheers. The queen's lips parted in surprise. He placed the crystal on the altar, and the fires died. The gates opened, and he walked out covered in ash and sweat, but standing tall. His eyes calm, his breath steady. The queen met him at the gate, her face unreadable. She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You passed." He nodded and replied, "I didn't come to prove anything, just wanted to survive." She tilted her head and said, "Many who come to prove themselves die. You came with no pride, and yet you won that night." The city lit fires in his honor. The people sang songs, not in his name, but in praise of the one who had done what no alien warrior could. He had passed the trial, using only his mind and heart. In the high tower, the queen sat alone again, her thoughts loud in her mind. She remembered the way he moved, the way he tricked the traps, the way he smiled, not with victory but with relief. She asked herself again, what lives in this human? Why does his presence stir the silence inside her chest? Why does his voice echo? In her dreams, she looked out at the stars, wondering if fate had brought him here, or if something older had already chosen this path, long before her throne was built. Down below, Jace looked up at the tower, his mind full of strange thoughts. He had never felt drawn to power or titles, but now he felt something different. Something strong pulling him toward, something he could not name. He closed his eyes and whispered to the wind, "I think she's more than a queen." And far above, her hand touched her chest, where her heart beat louder than ever before. The throne hall was colder than usual, as shadows gathered along the walls. Tall windows let in pale light from the twin moons, but it did not warm the hearts of those who stood waiting for the queen to speak. Her voice had not been heard since the human returned from the trial of fire and bone. The nobles whispered among themselves, their words like snakes moving in the dark. "He should not be here. He is only a man of flesh and words. No blood of the stars, no power of the throne, and yet the queen watches him like a flame watches air." The queen sat silent, her hand resting on the arm of her throne, eyes distant, her thoughts not with the council, but somewhere else, somewhere far and strange, where logic did not live, where only feeling remained. The high priest stepped forward, his voice low and sharp. He said, "My queen, the people are uneasy. They wonder why the human was not sent away after the trial, why he walks free, why he sleeps in the tower once used only for princes of blood." The queen looked at him with calm fire in her gaze, and said, "He passed the trial with mind, not muscle. He faced death and chose life, and for that he earned my respect." The nobles did not speak, they only bowed, but inside their hearts, twisted with fear and anger, the old ways were changing, and they did not know how to stop it. That night the queen walked alone through the crystal gardens, her cloak trailing behind her, her feet silent on the glowing stones. The flowers opened as she passed, sensing her presence, but she did not notice them. Her mind was filled with one name. Jesse had stayed quiet since the trial, spending his days helping builders repair the broken skybridge, using tools he did not understand, but still trying, using laughter to ease the fear of alien workers who had never heard such strange joy. He did not demand reward, he did not chase power, he simply existed like a wind that moved without asking permission. The queen found herself watching him from shadows. More than once, her fingers tightening on cold walls, her chest growing hot with something she had never felt before, something sharp and soft all at once. Back in the throne hall, the whispers turned darker. A noble named Vela gathered others in secret. He said, "If we let this continue, the queen will forget her duty. She will take the human as a mate, and we will lose the bloodline forever." One asked, "What shall we do?" And Vela replied, "We remove the human before he poisons her heart." Plan was set. The poison was rare and silent, made from the roots of the whispering tree. Only one drop needed to stop a beating heart forever. A servant loyal to Valor carried the cup into the guest tower, where Jace sat, drawing strange pictures of stars and machines in his little book. The cup was placed beside him. The servant bowed and left without a word. But fate is not blind and hearts are not weak. The queen that night had chosen to visit him, not as ruler but as woman. Her steps light, her voice low. As she entered his chamber she saw the cup on the table, and something inside her warned her, something cold and sharp. Like the point of a blade, her hand moved fast. She knocked the cup away, and it shattered on the floor, black liquid staining the stone. Jace stood quickly, confused but calm. He asked what happened, and the queen looked at him, her eyes fierce with rage and fear, and said, "Someone tried to end you." He blinked slowly, then nodded and said, "I thought peace would follow after the trial, but maybe peace is harder to earn than respect." The queen called her guards, her voice like thunder. The traitor servant was caught, and soon the noble behind it all was found. The punishment was exile into the Stormlands, where no soul returned. Later that night, Jace looked at the queen and asked, "Why did you come to me tonight?" Why now? She looked at him, not as ruler, not as warrior, but as being made of flesh and breath, and said, "I do not know, but when I heard silence, I felt afraid. I have never feared silence before." He took her hand, not as man taking woman, but as soul touching soul, and said, "I do not want to change your throne or your ways. I only want to stand near the fire, not take either." Eyes closed and opened again, and in that space something shifted. Her body stayed still, but her heart leaned closer. From far above, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as if they knew that something ancient had just been touched. Something no blade could carve, no law could hold, no army could destroy. The night was heavy with heat, as the queen walked through the secret paths of her own palace. Her steps unsure, her breath slow. For the first time in many years, she did not feel like a ruler. She felt like a woman with questions too large to hold. Alone she reached the high garden, where firelight danced along the smooth walls, and the wind carried the scent of blue fruit and starlight. She found him there, as always, not in fear, not in hiding, but in silence, looking up at the stars with the same quiet wonder that never left his face. Jace turned as he heard her footsteps, but he did not speak first. He waited for her words, waited with the same calm that had softened her anger from the first day she sat beside him, her armor leapt behind, her crown forgotten, her voice gentle as she asked, "Do you miss your home?" He looked at her, not with pity, not with pride, but with something pure, and said, "I miss the sky that smelled like rain, and the trees that bent with the wind, but I do not miss the war, or the hunger, or the sound of machines breaking." The queen said nothing for a long while, then asked again, "Do you miss your people?" He smiled, but it was not joy, and said, "I think I was always strange to them. I always wanted to see what else was out there beyond the old stars. Maybe I was always meant to leave." The fire crackled nearby, and the queen felt something rise inside her, something new, something deep. It was not just respect, not just curiosity, it was something warmer, something softer, like a song without words. She looked at his hands, rough and small and strange, and remembered how they had held hers when the poison cup fell, remembered how he never flinched, never begged, never asked for safety. She reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his, and he did not pull away. They sat like that for a long time, her skin hot where it touched his, her heart louder with every breath, and still no words were spoken. He looked at her then with a gaze full of questions and courage, and asked softly, "Do you feel it too?" The queen did not answer with speech. Instead, she leaned forward slowly, her forehead touching his. And in that moment, every wall she had built, every guard she had raised, every scar she had hidden began to fall. Like dust in the wind, she whispered, "I was raised to take, not to receive, to command, not to feel, to win, not to hope, and now you come to me. Without sword, without shield, without need, and somehow you give me something no warrior ever could." He held her hands now fully, his voice shaking a little as he said, "I have nothing to offer, no riches, no armies, no titles, only this moment, only this feeling." She pulled him close, and for the first time, her lips touched another, not in conquest, not in ceremony, but in truth, in need, in fire. The stars turned above them, and the garden glowed brighter, as if the world itself gave them its blessing. Later, as the night deepened, they lay side by side on soft stone, her cloak around them, both her head resting on his chest, his fingers tracing the lines of her arm. She said, "I do not understand how this happened," he answered. "Maybe it was not meant to be understood. Maybe it just was." She looked at the sky and whispered, "My people will not accept this, not easily. Not soon." He said, "I will not ask you to change who you are, but if there is a place for me beside you, I will stay." Her breath caught at those words, not because they were grand, but because they were simple and true and real. And then a pulse echoed through The ground a deep vibration that only she could feel, something ancient, something alive. The old temple stones began to hum with golden light far below the palace. The high priest awoke from sleep, his eyes wide, his heart racing. He ran to the temple and saw the ancient stone glowing brighter than ever before, and on it, the prophecy burned in new lines: she has chosen, and the stars accept. The one not born of our kind, the one who gave without taking, the one who touched without breaking. In morning the queen stood on her balcony, her face calm, her body still, but her heart forever changed. She looked down at the garden where Jace still slept, unaware of how the world had already begun to turn. She placed her hand on her stomach, a strange warmth, spreading from deep within her fingers, shook, and her eyes narrowed, not in anger, not in fear, but in wonder. Something had begun inside her, something no alien male had ever sparked, something alive, and she whispered to the wind, he gave me what no male ever could. The sky above the capital turned gold and silver as the twin suns rose higher than ever before. The wind carried songs from distant towers, but inside the queen's chamber, there was only silence, thick and deep like the ocean. Before a storm queen, Zalara stood before the great mirror, her bare hand pressed to her stomach, her breath uneven, her eyes wide and unblinking. She had faced war beasts, poison and betrayal without fear, but now her body shook with something she had never known before, something she did not yet understand. The healers had come at dawn, silent and skilled. They had tested her blood and touched her skin and listened to her breath, and when they stepped back, their faces were pale, their hands trembling. They bowed low and whispered one truth: my queen, you carry life. She had not spoken then, she had only nodded and turned away, walking slowly back to her chamber as if the air had turned to glass around her. Every step felt like a question with no answer. She now looked at herself in the mirror, not as a ruler, not as a warrior, but as a woman whose world had changed without her command. A new fire now lived inside her, and it burned with quiet strength. Behind the walls of the palace, the council gathered again, fear stronger than ever in their voices. They had felt the change, they had heard the whispers from the stars, and they knew something had shifted forever. Priest Korra stood before them, his old hands shaking as he held the glowing scroll. The prophecy burns anew, he said. The words have returned, and they speak of a child, not of full blood, but of union, not of strength, but of balance. Valor, who had returned from exile in secret, now stood in shadow, whispering to the others, this cannot be allowed. If the child is born, our laws will break, our throne will bend. We must act before it is too late. They planned in silence, sharp and cruel their thoughts, like blades in the dark, waiting for the right time to strike. Jace walked through the quiet halls, unaware of the storm rising around him. He felt the change in the air, but did not know the reason. He only knew that, when he touched the queen's hand, the night before, her skin had felt warmer, her heart louder, her voice softer. He looked for her now, following the echo of her breath, the scent of her hair, the pull of something deep and unseen. Found her by the sacred pool, where the waters glowed with old magic. Her back to him, her hand still pressed to her stomach. She turned slowly, her face unreadable, her eyes filled with questions that even she could not answer. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke with a voice quiet as falling snow. Something grows inside me, something I did not believe was possible. He stepped closer, not afraid, not proud, and whispered, is it mine? She nodded once, and the world seemed to pause around them. Trees stopped, swaying, light froze in the water, and even the wind held its breath. He took her hands gently and said, I do not know what this means for your people, but I know what it means for me. You are not alone. She felt his words like fire and water all at once, and for the first time in her long reign, she allowed her head to rest against another's chest, not as queen, not as warrior, not as ruler, but simply as one who felt. Later, the queen summoned the stars to confirm what the healers had said. The old crystals spun in circles and sang the songs of fate, and the light they cast was clear. The child would be born strong and stranger, both bloods with power neither side had seen before. But as the news spread, joy did not follow, fear did. Warriors questioned their loyalty, priests trembled at the thought of prophecy made real, nobles whispered of bloodlines broken and power taken by an outsider. In a chamber dark and cold, Valor and his loyal few prepared their last plan. They would not wait for the child to grow, they would act before the throne changed forever. That night cloaked figures crept through the palace halls, blades hidden, voices low, but as they reached the queen's door, a bright shield of fire blocked their path, standing between them, and the child was Jace. His body lit with strange energy, his eyes glowing, not with power of his own, but with the protection of the queen herself. She stepped beside him, her armor glowing, her voice like thunder. If you touch him, you touch me, and if you touch me, you bring war upon your houses. The traitors fled, some caught by guards, some vanished into the night, but the message was clear. The cliff had chosen, and the throne now had a future with fire and sky, mixed into one sheet. Turned to Jace, her hand finding his, her voice soft again. This child will be hunted, feared, maybe even hated, he replied. Then we teach them not to fear, but to see, not to hate, but to hope. She looked out the window at her people, at her world, and knew nothing would ever be the same. And deep inside her, the child turned for the first time, as if it too heard the promise. The skies over Jireen turned dark with storm clouds, not of weather but of change. Every tower, every hall, every corner of the great city buzzed with quiet voices, voices asking if the queen would truly stand with the outsider, voices asking what would happen when the child was born, voices afraid, and voices full of hope. Inside the great chamber of stars, Queen Zalara stood tall, her golden armor shining brighter than ever, her eyes glowing like twin suns, her voice steady and clear as she called her people to gather, called them not with force, but with will, not with commands, but with purpose. The entire city came to the throne hall, not just nobles, not just warriors, but workers, builders, mothers and children, all stood in silence, as the queen stepped forward with Captain Jace Thorn at her side, and her hand resting on her belly where new life stirred. She raised one hand and the whole fell silent, like the calm before lightning, and she spoke in a voice that carried to every ear. I once stood above all. I once believed no one was worthy. I once thought love was weakness and peace was a lie. She looked at Jace, then her voice softening. I was wrong. Gasps filled the hall. Whispers ran like water through the stone corridors. But the queen did not stop. Her words like fire and wind mixed into truth. This human gave me no gifts of gold, no blades of power, no ships or armies. He gave me only honesty and light. He stood before me when others fell. He saw me not as queen, not as warrior, but as a being who still had more to learn. She stepped forward, again her hand now held by Jace, her other still resting on the life growing inside her. Some of you fear this child, she said, because it is new, because it is different, because it is both of us, not just me, and not just him, but something greater. You say, the throne will fall if I take a mate beyond our kind, but I say the throne only falls when we stop growing, when we stop listening, when we let fear guide us, instead of wisdom. The high priest stepped forward, holding the scroll of the stars, the words now glowing brighter than ever. He read aloud so all could hear. When the queen finds truth beyond her walls, and joins with what the stars send forth, then shall the next flame be born, a flame not of war, but of hope, not of blood, but of choice. Many bowed then, others hesitated, some turned their faces away, but none spoke. Against her not one voice rose to challenge her, not even Valor, who now stood broken among the crowd, his power lost, his fear made small by something he could not destroy. The queen took Jace's hand again, and looked into his eyes. Her voice now quiet so only he could hear. I do not know how to love the way your kind does, but I feel it, like a storm in my chest, and I choose it now. I choose you, he answered with a smile, small and full of wonder. I never asked you to be anything but yourself, and I will stand beside you in every storm. Outside the palace the people waited, and when they saw the queen step onto the high balcony with Jace beside her, and her hand on her belly, they fell to their knees, not in fear, not in duty, but in respect for a new beginning. The winds changed that day, not just in the air, but in the hearts of the people and even in the stars above, as if the galaxy itself had taken one long breath, and finally exhaled. The queen, who had once refused every male, every suitor, every offer of alliance, now stood beside the only one who had never asked for her throne, only her time, only her truth. And in the days that followed, the city changed. Old rules were rewritten, walls were softened, bridges built between bloodlines and belief. For now, they had proof that strength did not always wear armor, and love did not always speak. Ludan, the quiet of the garden, where they first touched hands. Jace and Zalara walked together, their steps slow and even, and though they still came from different worlds, they now walked the same path, not as queen and guest, not as ruler and stranger, but as two souls who chose each other. As night fell, the stars above glowed brighter than ever, and from deep within the palace came a sound soft and new, the heartbeat of the child of fire and sky, steady and strong. And the queen whispered not to the stars, not to her people, but to herself, and to the small life growing inside her. You were not born from fear or duty or plan, you were born from choice, and that is the strongest power of all.